rock in a deep chasm, the only iron-stained rock on the face of Ragnarok. Surely, he had thought, there would be enough iron there to build a small ship. For 11 years he had worked toward the day when he would find it. Now he had found it, and it was nothing. The ship was as far away as ever. But discouragement was as useless as iron-stained sandstone. He shook it off and turned to Barber. "Let's go," he said. "Maybe we'll find something by the time we circle the chasm." For 7 days they risked the danger of death from downward plunging rocks, and found nothing. On the 8th day they found the treasure that was not treasure. They stopped for the evening just within the mouth of one of the chasm's tributaries. Humboldt went out to get a drink where a trickle of water ran through the sand, and as he knelt down he saw the flash of something red under him, almost buried in the sand. He lifted it out. It was a stone half the size of his hand, darkly translucent and glowing in the light of the setting sun like blood. It was a ruby. He looked and saw another gleam a little farther up the stream. It was another ruby, almost as large as the first one. Near it was a flawless blue sapphire. Scattered here and there were smaller rubies and sapphires, down to the size of grains of sand. He went farther upstream and saw specimens of still another stone. They were colorless but burning with internal fires. He rubbed one of them hard across the ruby he still carried, and there was a gritting sound as it cut a deep scratch in the ruby. "I'll be damned," he said aloud. There was only one stone hard enough to cut a ruby: the diamond. It was almost dark when he returned to where Barber was resting beside their packs. "What did you find to keep you out so late?" Barber asked curiously. He dropped a double handful of rubies, sapphires, and diamonds at Barber's feet. "Take a look," he said. "On a civilized world, what you see there would buy us a ship without our having to lift a finger. Here, they're just pretty rocks. Except the diamonds," he added. "At least we now have something to cut those quartz crystals with." They took only a few of the rubies and sapphires the next morning, but they gathered more of the diamonds, looking in particular for the gray-black and ugly, but very hard and tough carbonado variety. Then they resumed their circling of the chasm's walls. The heat continued its steady increase as the days went by. Only at night was there any relief from it, and the nights were growing swiftly shorter as the blue sun rose earlier each morning. When the yellow sun rose, the chasm became a blazing furnace around the edge of which they crept like ants in some gigantic oven. There was no life in any form to be seen, no animal or bush or blade of grass. There was only the barren floor of the chasm, made a harsh green shade by the two suns, and writhing and undulating with heat waves like a nightmare sea, while above them the towering cliffs shimmered too, and sometimes seemed to be leaning far out over their heads and already falling down upon them. They found no more minerals of any kind, and they came at last to the place where they had seen the smoke or vapor. There the walls of the chasm drew back to form a little valley a mile long by a half-mile wide. The walls did not drop vertically to the floor there, but sloped out at the base into a fantastic formation of natural roofs and arches that reached almost to the center of the valley from each side. Green things grew in the shade under the arches, and sparkling waterfalls cascaded down over many of them. A small creek carried the water out of the valley, going out into the chasm a little way before the hot sands absorbed it. They stood and watched for some time, but there was no movement in the valley other than the waving of the green plants as a breeze stirred them. Once the breeze shifted to bring them the fresh, sweet scent of growing things and urged them to come closer. "A place like that doesn't belong here," Barber said in a low voice. "But it's there. I wonder what else is there. Shade and cool water, Humboldt said. And maybe things that don't like strangers. Let's go find out. They watched warily as they walked, their crossbows in their hands. At the closer range, they saw that the roofs and arches were the outer remains of a system of natural caves that went back into the valley's walls. The green vegetation grew wherever the roofs gave part-time shade, consisting mainly of a holly-leafed bush with purple flowers and a tall plant resembling corn. Under some of the roofs the corn was mature, the orange-colored grains visible. Under others it was no more than half-grown. He saw the reason, and said to Barber, "There are both warm and cold springs here. The plants watered by the warm springs would grow almost the year round. The ones watered by the cold springs only in the summer. And what we saw from the mountain top would have been vapor rising from the warm springs." They passed under arch after arch without seeing any life. When they came to the valley's upper end and still had seen nothing, it seemed evident that there was little danger of an encounter with any intelligent and hostile creatures. Apparently, nothing at all lived in the little valley. Humboldt stopped under a broad arch where the breeze was made cool and moist by the spray of water it had come through. Barber went on to look under the adjoining arch. Caves led into the wall from both arches, and as he stood there Humboldt saw something lying in the mouth of the nearest cave. It was a little mound of orange corn, lying in a neat pile, as though whatever had left it there had intended to come back after it. He looked toward the other arch, but Barber was somewhere out of sight. He doubted that whatever had left the corn could be much of a menace. Dangerous animals were more apt to eat flesh than corn, but he went to the cave with his crossbow ready. He stopped at the mouth of the cave to let his eyes become accustomed to the darkness inside it. As he did so, the things inside came out to meet him. They emerged into full view. 6 little animals the size of squirrels, each of them a different color. They walked on short hind legs like miniature bears, and the dark eyes in the bear chipmunk faces were fixed on him with intense interest. They stopped 5 feet in front of him, there to stand in a neat row and continue the fascinated staring up at him. The yellow one in the center scratched absently at its stomach with a furry paw, and he lowered the bow, feeling a little foolish at having bothered to raise it against animals so small and harmless. Then he half brought it up again, as the yellow one opened its mouth and said in a tone that held distinct anticipation, "I think we'll eat you for supper." He darted glances to right and left, but there was nothing near him except the 6 little animals. The yellow one, having spoken, was staring silently at him with only curiosity on its furry face. He wondered if some miasma or some scent from the vegetation in the valley had warped his mind into sudden insanity, and asked, "You think you'll do what?" It opened its mouth again to stutter, I, then with a note of alarm, "Hey!" It said no more, and the next sound was that of Barber hurrying toward him and calling, "Hey, Bill, where are you?" "Here," he answered, and he was already sure that he knew why the little animal had spoken to him. Barber came up and saw the 6 chipmunk bears. "6 of them!" he exclaimed. "There's one in the next cave. The damn thing spoke to me." "I thought so," he replied. "You told it we'd have it for supper, and then it said, 'You think you'll do what?' didn't it?" Barber's face showed surprise. "How did you know that?" "They're telepathic, between one another," he said. "The yellow one there repeated what the one you spoke to heard you say, and it repeated what the yellow one heard me say. It has to be telepathy between them." Telepathy? Barber stared at the 6 little animals, who stared back with their fascinated curiosity undiminished. But why should they want to repeat aloud what they received telepathically?